Hello there and greetings. Welcome to Beer Christianity. My name is Jonny Lang, and this is going to be a kind of review episode, but it's also going to introduce you to the glories of Christian rock and Christian alternative music. So you are very, very welcome. And if you're wondering about the lack of sounds in terms of bar sounds, dogs walking into ladies' bathrooms, Coldplay just kicking off in the background, or indeed the giggles and joyful laughter of my two partners in crime, Drabs and Laura, it's because I'm currently recording in my very own study, which I can describe for you at some point if you want, but really it's just mostly made out of huge piles of books and crucifixes on the wall and Sisters of Mercy album covers on the other wall, with a small assortment of pictures of goth girls and a still from Brief Encounter. So yeah, on the desk I have a desk. It's so freaking meta. It's an old sound desk. It's a Zoom R16, which I'm trying out. I don't have a plug for the headphones, so if I'm peaking ridiculously, I'm terribly sorry. And if you're not into sound, then you won't know what that means, and it just sounds like I'm a cheeky chappy. So this issue of Beer Christianity is going to feature an interview with Doug Van Pelt. If you are into Christian alternative music or indeed Christian heavy metal, you'll know a little bit about him. He is, or was, maybe he still is, the editor of HM, which is a magazine that was called Heaven's Metal, and then became Hard Music. And I honestly have no idea if if it still exists, but you should definitely check it out. And the reason we're going to be doing that is because I want to tell you a little bit about two Christian hard music albums that I listened to recently that have come out quite recently. I'm going to try and get some interviews with the bands, but bands being bands, they're probably quite busy and on tour, and who the hell's Beer Christianity? But I did do this interview with Doug Van Pelt about 1 million years ago, and so I'm interested to hear what I asked him. I'm interested to hear what young me sounded like, and the kind of dumbass crap that I asked a busy editor who was very kind and spoke to me, probably because I recorded it when I was doing audio feature training at the BBC, the very same British Broadcasting Corporation, and it must be over 10 years ago now, so I'm sure all of our references will be super old. So think of it as like retro, and in some way related to the bands I'm going to be telling you a little bit about. But first of all, Downton Abbey, aka Bootlickers Abbey. That's what I want to tell you about. This podcast contains spoilers. So if you haven't seen the Downton Abbey movie, then, I suggest you listen anyway so that you can get woke about Downton Abbey. That's right, Beer Christianity, bringing you the most important, most relevant news. Sure, we're facing environmental catastrophe. Sure, the rise of fascism is terrifying. But the real things you need to worry about is whether a cozy British film is ideologically and theologically pure. And don't you worry, I'm here. I got you. Also, for those of you who are beer nerds, I am drinking a beautiful lager from South Africa, which is where I'm from. I'm a beautiful lager from South Africa. It's golden, it's frothy, it has a great head. It's called Cape Point. And its label is kind of cute. I'll put a picture of this on the podcast page. Podcast page, by the way, if you want to find links to our Twitter, to Apple Podcasts page, to Spotify page, to our Stitcher page. We're on Stitcher now. You can find all of that stuff there. And we're also going to be providing some kind of extra materials going forward. We've got a really cool Halloween episode coming up with Peter Laws. We've got an excellent episode coming up with David Jasper, who's the founder of Theology and Literature and Theology Journal and Conference and all that kind of stuff. Really amazing guy, talking a lot about Christianity and literature with a focus on Graham Greene. If you've never read any Graham Greene, get reading so that you'll understand what he's going to be saying. But yeah, I am drinking Cape Point Lager, and let me just tell you exactly what it's like. It tastes like beer. And, who could ask for more than that? All right. So I saw the Downton Abbey movie tonight. And I need to say, first of all, that I don't want to be one of those joyless dickheads who suggests that nothing can be fun as long as injustice, reigns on the earth. I think you can still have fun. I want a revolution with dancing. Hell, I want a revolution with nice, cozy TV dramas as well. What I think I don't want is for us to, easily swallow the messages that are being put through in these movies. Gosh, I sound like one of those discernment podcasts. The True Word, Real Truth with Jonathan Lang. Excuse me. I do think it should be called Bootlicker's Abbey because the film is almost everything that is wrong with kind of middle-class liberals, with progressive. It is the Lib Dems of movies, I think. Because on the one hand, and I say spoilers again, so if you're going to watch it, this may ruin some plot points. It's hardly a suspenseful thriller, so I'm not sure it's going to ruin it that badly for you. But, I don't want to be that guy, so I give you the warnings. It does a lot of things right, but it does so much wrong. And I think you can put it into broadly, it's putting forward a kind of liberal vision of the world that is progressive, but not that progressive. But the important thing is that we keep the the power and economic structures in place. And I think this is a kind of metaphor for the church, really. So in the film, you have a character who we've long known is gay. Yes, I watch Downton Abbey. Don't you judge me. It's great TV, and I have avidly consumed all of it. So, death of Matthew? The death of Matthew Pichu. Am I right? Heartbreaking. I'm with all my Downton peeps out there. But also, what the hell was I saying? I'm gonna have another drink. Okay, right. There's a character that we've long known is gay or at least bisexual, okay? And in this one, we finally get the affirmation that he needs. And it's actually a genuinely beautiful little subplot that didn't need to be put in there, but, they wanted to put it in there, of a guy who we've hated and we've loved and, seems to have redeemed himself. And now he's fully redeemed himself because he's gay and he ends up going to a gay club and he faces the prejudice of the age, but he also finally finds some people who can empathize with him, and he meets somebody who I think he may fall in love with. You remember the scene? He goes to this gay bar, the cops come and pick him up, and that is wonderful. And the affirmation in that is really great, except it's not that great. It's not like, we're left thinking, I think, as viewers, well, that's enough. I mean, he's found love, and sure, it's a horrifically oppressive system, but, what are we going to do? Now, maybe the writers and directors are not saying that we should accept it. Maybe they're saying that this is terrible and we should hate it. And you certainly do get a sick feeling in your stomach because he experiences this kind of freedom and joy for the first time, and then suddenly it's all kind of swept away, and you're kind of left with, pondering how much the LGBT community has, been oppressed and tortured for so very long. So, yay, we've got this really positive, affirming kind of love story, gay love story in it. And I'm like, yeah, I like that. And as a Christian, if you watch that and you don't have sympathy or empathy for people who just want to be left alone, man, and be able to feel normal and be able to feel loved, well, then I think you have a problem with your empathy, and I think you have a problem perhaps with, obeying those commands to love your neighbor. The verses that say that we can speak in the tongues of men and angels, but if we don't have love, then we are nothing. So cool. Hey, go you, Downton Abbey. And there's another, I'm starting with the positives. There's a few sections where Edith is, the powerlessness of a woman in the aristocracy to an extent is kind of, highlighted. And you've even got, the incredibly smug American woman who's married to Lord Grantham. What the hell is her name? Lady Grantham, I'm guessing. she's not that smug. I like her. She ends up, I don't know, doing some kind of girl power thing about, well, you asked the king, but I asked the queen, and, girls rule the world and all that kind of stuff, which I've always found facile and, a pretend stab at feminism that doesn't really do much. But still, okay, cool. So we've got those liberal values of let's affirm women and, down with patriarchy, except not in any kind of real way, and let's affirm the LGBT community, but not in a way that actually requires society to change in any way. But hey, still a step in the right direction and something that's really cool. However, the rest of it, oh my goodness, just bloody awful. Have you seen the film? There is a scene where the maid, the blonde one, the one who's married to the boxer guy, and, I don't know, they're like a lot of the early seasons were all about them. She kind of, the new lady of the house, Mary, who is, wow, so beautiful, but also, as a character, so complicated. She is saying, should we still carry on? Are we not an anachronism? And, I just want to stand up in the cinema going, yes, you're a freaking anachronism. What is wrong with you? Look at your lands. Look at your castles. All these, like, beautiful drone shots of the castle. And I'm just like, come on, guys. Like, do you realize what you're sitting and holding on to in a world full of need? Anyway, the maid gives this impassioned speech about you're the heart of this community, and the reason why this tiny handful of incredibly privileged people should continue to own all this land and hold on to it and hold on to the privilege and lord it over their servants in a very kind of nice way, but still lording over them, is because you're the center of this community and you're providing a place where people can work. And it is straight up Tory crap, and this is my problem with a lot of kind of Lib Demi kind of thinking, of just like, hey, we don't have to change the power structures, we don't have to change the economic structures, because the important thing is that we just behave nicely within them, but kind of leave it as is. So as long as the people who are being waited on hand and foot are generally nice people and care about the people underneath them, then it doesn't matter that those people are sleeping in basically shoeboxes and will have no pension plan and will probably die destitute, because, hey, occasionally Lady Grantham will say, is it Lady Grantham? Mary, anyway, will go like, you're a really good friend to me. And then this fictional servant will go, you're a really good friend to me. Now, I don't doubt that many of, the people in the servant and working class in those kind of establishments were probably ridiculous royalists, in the same way that a lot of people who are sent to die as poor people in the army on behalf of wealthy interests are like, yeah, Queen and country, man. So maybe it's realistic, but what an awful message. These are people who legitimately, a butler gets genuinely excited because he's, going to be serving the king and queen. And hey, that's nice, it's fun, we all like a celeb, right? And he then does the ultimate, like, awful thing. And are you thinking, does he spill soup on the king? Because, that'd be terrible. No, he speaks to him. And everybody at the table, all of these people who we're supposed to like, who we're supposed to think of as, well, there are overlords, but they're enlightened overlords, turns to him and looks at him like he's done something awful. And they bring it up several times later, like, I cannot believe you did that. You addressed the king. And all I want to say is, fuck off. Do you know what I mean? This is a human being. And I don't want to sound like, some kind of raving Republican. Have a king, don't have a king. It's not like, democracy is a perfect system of government either. But to have this attitude of, like, how dare you speak to somebody of a superior rank. And there's just so much of that in the film. It's okay that another character is leaving her fortune to her maid because, spoilers, the maid is actually her daughter. So that makes it okay. It would be okay anyway. It's her money. And also, hey, let's redistribute that a little bit around the thing. The bad guys in the movie are a guy who doesn't think Britain should be dominating Ireland. What a beast. And the other servants who are uppity, because it's totally fine for the ruling classes to look at you like you have just dropped a turd in their beer if you talk to them. But if a working class, if a butler, if a maid is uppity, that's the thing we're taught to despise. The entire message of the film is, and it's always given by the working class people. And again, listen to my accent. Am I grinding a particular axe here? I don't think so. This is just purely, this is a dumb idea. The working class people are saying things like, there should always be a Crawley at the... By the way, if you've never watched it, this is so pointless. There should always be a Crawley at Downton Abbey. What do they have? A bug infestation. There should always be this family sitting there, and we should always be serving them. Why? Now, again, I don't believe that Christianity is in itself entirely Republican. I don't believe that it should be thought of or expressed that way. There's a lot of different political ideologies that it can sit well with, although, I'm going to say that socialism is, pretty much the closest, most, most godly. And if you can make it Christian socialism, hey, fantastic. And even communism, I think, like all of these things, like they are expressing God's heart for the poor, and what they're doing is using a centralized state apparatus to achieve his justice. I spoke to somebody who was the head of a seminary in Eastern Europe, who had been a communist and had then become a Christian, and a Southern Baptist actually. And I'd said, wow, it's a big jump to go from communist to Southern Baptist. And he just went, is it though? And he, and actually some Christians I've met from Nepal, heads of churches there, when I talked to them about kind of how do you get on with, the concept of communism, or in Nepal, Maoism and that sort of stuff. And they echoed similar things, which is to say we have a lot in common with them because they care about the poor and they care about the weak and they care about the hungry. And we find that the rest of our culture or our society perhaps doesn't. And this guy from Eastern Europe actually said that communism exists because the church has failed in its duty. And I think that's kind of my review of the Downton Abbey thing, is the movie. I mean, again, love the series, and it's a fun movie, and I enjoyed it. Ate a lot of popcorn, but I think the problem with it is that as the church, I think we do that quite a lot. We have that message of like, as long as we do a few nice things, as long as we, buy paper straws rather than plastic, as long as we affirm the LGBT community, as long as we, are doing our bit to empower women, I think everything else can probably just stay the same. Like, well, we've done enough, haven't we? And kind of ignoring the basic fundamental fact that the person who probably comes off the worst in the film is a lady's maid or seamstress or something who is stealing things from the room, and she gets this incredibly judgy reception from that blonde voice of bootlicking who goes, so you just think because not everyone can have these nice things that nobody should, as if that's a reason why anybody who is really poor steals from the very rich who won't even notice it. And the woman makes a very good case of like, they won't even notice it. As a Christian, do I condone stealing? No, but if stealing is the main thing that you take from that, when the poor steal from the incredibly rich, if you think, well, the main thing we need to focus on here is the sin of stealing, I'm going to say that you're missing the largest sin. You should have obeyed the former without ignoring the latter, or something like that, to misquote the film. So anyway, my main thing is Downton Abbey is super fun, but also the people who they're making out to be the bad guys, I'm like, yikes, I don't know, man. Like, there's a lot in here that I just want to go, could you not sell this stuff up and put it into some kind of commune type thing for your local community? Or hell, just start campaigning like a decent human being for the nationalization of all of this wealth so that we could create something better for everybody, Because the truth is, the situation is not, well, not everyone can have these nice things. Maybe not everyone can have silver cupids and, painted glass and all that sort of stuff. Maybe. Although I imagine we could probably have nicer things for everybody if we were willing to take the really, really good stuff from the people at the top. Like Jeff Bezos, who is, wealthy beyond anyone's imaginings. And you can check out those websites that talk about how much money he's made in the last minute and all that sort of stuff, who has just cut some fundamental benefits from the people who work for him ultimately at, I think, Whole Foods. There's something wrong with that. There's something not cool with that. And I think as a Christian, you read the Bible. God is not pleased by that. And when you find people trundling out this, well, if you will not work, you will not eat argument against socialism, I'm thinking, how is somebody putting their capital into investments working? How are they eating off that and you have no problem with it? Anyway, that's enough of a rant. I should drink some beer, and you should listen to my slightly ropey interview with editor extraordinaire and genuinely nice guy Doug Van Pelt.
First, can you give us an idea for people in the UK who don't have a Christian rock scene to speak of? Can you give us an idea of how different the US experience might be?
Sure. Well, in the US, we've become experts at creating our own subgenres and our own scenes and our own private country club atmospheres. And in some ways, we've done that with Christian music. It started out in the early 70s. A few of the hippies or people from the rock and roll generation, they found Jesus, and in a most practical sense, they wanted to use their language and their art to communicate Jesus to their peers. And forming a Christian rock band seemed like the natural way to do that because it was the language they spoke. And a lot of the music then, artists like Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill and early Petra and Resurrection Band, they all communicated that yearning and that desire to share the love of Jesus with honesty. And a few record companies and radio stations and concert promoters and the whole infrastructure that goes around making music available to people, live or recorded, sprung up so that they could get this music into the hands of people because some of the radio stations would say, we don't want to play Jesus rock on our radio waves. We don't want people to hear that they're bad people or that they're sinners. We want people to party and have a good time. So there was kind of a bias and a rejection in mainstream radio for Christian rock, and the stores kind of gave the same cold shoulder to the young scene. And so an industry was formed around Christian music to support it and help it get out because they were getting doors shut in their face in the mainstream. And so that's kind of how it formed way back when, and now it's definitely developed. You've got a lot of money, a lot of slick promotional packaging, and a lot of bands are touring. In different parts of the country in the U.S., you can see concerts quite frequently. I'm in Austin, Texas, and sometimes it's feast and sometimes it's famine, but many times there'll be bands on Tooth and Nail Records that are coming through some of the clubs in downtown Austin, where you could see a couple concerts a week of a faith-based or a Christian rock band somewhere around town. And you can go into Christian shops as well as mainstream shops and find a lot of Christian CDs on the shelves.
You talked about the cold shoulder that a lot of the bands got back in the 60s. That seems to be changing quite a lot in the sense that the secular scene seems to have picked up a lot of the bands. So would you agree with that?
Yes. Some of the lessons learned in this, I think, is that the Christian music scene has become a small fishbowl. And if you're mediocre or fairly decent at your art, you can become a big fish in a small fishbowl. But you drop that same fish in the ocean, which is the mainstream music world, which takes a lot more money and a lot more marketing to get you noticed when you're talking about, hundreds of millions of people versus, a lot less number. But because some of the Christian artists decided, if I'm going to make art, especially for God, I'm going to do it to the best of my abilities. And instead of trying to complain about the fact that they got a cold shoulder, they actually improved their art and made their music better. That is one reason why it's gotten the attention of the mainstream music world, is because the art is better. It stands on its own and competes with the music around it. Secondly, some of these artists have actually made big money, and nothing gets your attention like, cash. And so a lot of attention has been paid to Christian music because it's one of the only musical scenes that's actually continued to grow over the years lately, where the music industry has taken a beating from digital downloading and stuff like that.
What are the success stories in the hard music side of things, particularly in the Christian scene?
Well, going back to the mid-'80s, you had a band called Stryper who came out of Orange County, California. Excuse me. And Stryper made it big. They went multi-platinum. I'm not sure about the numbers. I'm pretty sure To Hell with the Devil went multi-platinum and sold at least a couple million records. And some of their other albums went gold, which means 500,000 units sold. So they were one of the first that really broke out big. Right around the same time, in a pop scene, Amy Grant struck it big with the Heart in Motion album, songs like Baby Baby. And in the mid-'90s, actually the late 90s, a band called POD was signed to Atlantic Records, and they became the biggest rock band in Christian music since Stryper to really go multi-platinum in 2001 with their Satellite album. They sold a few million copies of that. And since then, you've had bands like Switchfoot make it pretty big. I'm not sure of the sales numbers, but I'm pretty sure they're platinum. There's a lot of small bands like Sixpence None the Richer have had mega hits. And there's a lot of Christian hard music bands like Zayo that have gone out in the mainstream. Under Oath, Anne Berlin is doing pretty well. A lot of Christian bands are going out there in the mainstream and really making a mark nowadays.
The guys in particularly in the hard scene and that sort of stuff, you mentioned Under Oath. What do you think is the secret of their success particularly?
Well, Under Oath has a unique flavor or unique identity in a crowded screamo/emo scene. They've got 6 band members. They got a keyboard player. They've got a clean vocalist, which is their drummer, and a scream vocalist, which is their frontman, and 2 guitar players and a bass. So they've got a unique setup and a fairly distinct sound, and that sets them apart a little bit. And they're just good at what they do. One byproduct of Christian music having a scene is it gives you a circuit to play in. And if you want to get busy and get out on the road and tour, you have a platform to improve your craft and get better at what you do. So there's been a little bit of that involved. It's kind of like in baseball, they have minor leagues or farm leagues that support and develop the players that actually graduate to play in the major leagues. So the Christian music scene is sometimes a smaller scene that helps develop talent. And one thing Under Oath has going for it, too, is they're very sincere. They're not trying to chase popularity or trying to water down their love for Jesus so they can be more popular and take out the offensive parts of Christianity. They're very upfront and honest about who they are. And perhaps, I can't speak for everybody, but perhaps people respect that they're not backing down for what they believe. And they're not really shoving it in people's faces, but they are making a bold stance. At every one of their shows, one of their members usually stands up and says, we love Jesus Christ, or we believe in Jesus Christ. And that's a pretty bold statement in the midst of a club.
Doug Van Pelt there, former editor of HM Magazine, talking about Under Oath. I saw them live in London at, I think, is it a club called The Garage in Islington? Was that a club? Email us and let us know if you do remember that show. They did stand up on stage and say, we do this because we love Jesus Christ. And it was packed. It was a very heavy show. At least half of the at least half of the crowd didn't know they were Christian. Definitely, I was there with a friend of mine who didn't know they were Christian, and they were just so cool and really intense. Since then, I think Under Oath, I think the lead singer had some kind of drug stuff. I mean, hey, I'm sitting here drinking now, by the way, a Castle Light, because, you got to watch that, or Wasteline, another South African beer, just a really nice beer. If you go to South Africa, you should drink some Castle. So no judges to the lead singer. I think he has since renounced his faith, which, if you're in the Christian music scene, I can imagine must be incredibly, incredibly tempting, because the judginess you get from the fans and the expectations that are put on you when you're just an ordinary person. I imagine this is how pastors feel as well, but you've got the temptations and pressures of touring, and people looking up to you in a way that maybe you never signed up for. Kind of sad vibe there. I mean, maybe he's come back, I don't know, I haven't actually been keeping up with him, but I do remember a thing about that. So yeah, sad times. But point is, the album They're Only Chasing Safety blew my mind when I first heard it. It is melodic, it is poetic, and it has this blend, like he says, of kind of clean, very kind of emo, gentle, emotional kind of vocals within this like very, very cool screaming. I still think Spencer from Under Oath has the coolest scream in all of music history. Just incredibly cool. Closely followed by Corey Brandon from Norma Jean. Although, to be fair, it's a different kind of vibe. The scream in Under Oath is just, it's very, very delightful. Do you remember Reliant K? Okay, not a heavy band, like kind of pop punk, basically Christian busted. I'm sorry, I feel so bad for even saying that. You're so much better than that if you're listening. Wow, guys, Reliant K, if you're listening, come on the show, please. I loved so freaking much. Point is, even had screaming on it, and that was a mainstream album, So yeah. Really, really cool band, really cool album. Check out Under Oath's They're Only Chasing Safety. And actually the subsequent stuff is also really, really cool. And I believe they have a new album out, but I have not listened to it. All the stuff on Spotify, I am not sponsored by Spotify, but once you've given in to paying for subscription music, then it just becomes the only thing you really do. So yeah. You're listening to Beer Christianity. My name is Jonny Lang. If you want to follow us on Twitter, please do. We're at Beer Exianity. I think that's fairly clear. You can also find us on Spotify. You can also find us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. So if you want to share things that way, we're on Apple Music, we're on Stitcher. And you can email us, although nobody ever has, admittedly, because I've got the email address so painfully wrong in the past. You can email us at beerchristianity@yahoo.com, not co.uk, but .com. And I wanted to tell you about some of that music. So Doug, nice guy, right? And I got to tell you, my passion for the longest time was Christian alternative music and Christian heavy music. So HM magazine was one of the greatest things I'd ever encountered. And after I was a subscriber to that, when I moved to the UK and I got into the kind of screamo, hardcore and emo scenes, I discovered a band called Norma Jean. If you don't know Norma Jean, you should check them out. They used to be called Ludacris, not the rapper, and they are genuinely astonishing. If you want an introduction to what Christian heavy music can genuinely sound like, Norma Jean are a really great example. They're not particularly gospel orientated, though you can pick up the Christian themes in their lyrics. There's one song that they've released recently which has a kind of like returning to regurgitation type, as a dog returns to his vomit, so does a sinner to his folly, I think, or a fool to his folly. But I think they're being kind of obscure about it. Anyway, but generally speaking, their content is just like you'd expect from any kind of hardcore band. They're just quite introspective. There's a lot of kind of, pain and darkness and all that sort of stuff, and just a lot of interesting kind of emotion coming out in quite like a stream of consciousness poetry type stuff. Really very reasonable lyrics. And the thing that you get from Norma Jean is that it's real. They're not a bunch of Christians who've decided that they want to hit that market and do a Christian version of X band. They're a very respected band within the hardcore scene or the metalcore scene, depending on which album you're talking about. And if you want an introduction to them, look for a song called Memphis Will Be Laid to Waste, which features, I think, the lead singer from Me Without You as well, another Christian band who are just super lovely. And it's just a really great album. The album actually that I would love, because that's from Bless the Martyr, I think. The album you should really check out is Redeemer. It is so very, very good. It has an amazing album cover. It's just very, very heavy and lovely and just makes you want to bang your head. But the new one is a 3-song kind of EP type thing called With Errors, kind of /with_errors by Norma Jean. Search that. It is on Spotify, and take a listen to that. It has some wonderful songs. I want to get in touch with the band and see if I can play some of this. I have no idea what the legality is of playing music on podcasts, so but you should listen to Landslide Defeater. And if you're not into heavy music, I still want you to go and find Landslide Defeater by Norma Jean and listen at 2 minutes and 25 seconds into the song, just to hear the most amazing use of guitar, and it's just so intense and wonderful, and made every hair on my body stand up when I listened to it. It was just so cool. I love it so much. So there's that I think you should go and take a listen to. I wish I could play music on this thing, because I used to be a real DJ and I used to be able to do that. The other one is a band who are usually much heavier but have gone kind of softer, which I was reading about on the Labeled podcast group. The Devil Wears Prada, kind of metal or metalcore band, like terribly heavy ordinarily, and their new thing is what is it called? Chemical. That's right. And the song Chemical, if you know the band Brand New, you're gonna like it. If you don't know the band Brand New, you should go and check them out. They're really great. Sic Transit Gloria, or actually The Devil and God Are a War Inside of Me. Those albums, amazing. Jesse, I think, is a Christian, judging from the lyrics, but has had some personal problems and done some bad things, I imagine. But hey, who hasn't? The Devil Wears Prada, the Chemical EP, is just very, very cool if you like Brand New. I also hear in the bass lines Bauhaus, actually, which is weird, because a metal band going through that kind of like emo, Taking Back Sunday, Brand New type vibe. I don't know. It's just very cool. It's still got some screamy vocals, but it's a lot kind of gentler and, more beautifuler. And I like it very much. I think you should check these things out. So head over and listen to some The Devil Wears Prada, listen to some Norma Jean, and the only other band that I've discovered recently, but I haven't been listening to enough to really fully recommend, but I have enjoyed a lot, is called The Famine. And they're just very cool. They have some very, very heavy they're more kind of straight up metal. There's a song called Consume Something or Other Repeat. I don't know. It's very cool. The Famine. Check them out. One of the album covers has got a very kind of Manson-looking album cover. It's very cool. It looks actually more like Ghost, if you know the band Ghost. Anyway, Christian heavy music, man. Did you know it existed? Are you into it? I don't know. Listen to Doug Van Pelt a little bit more.
For people for whom this is an entirely foreign concept, some people have heard obviously of Switchfoot, and I think POD made it apparent that there are Christian bands who are producing rock. But for the extreme side of things, for the screamo, the emo, and the hardcore bands like Norma Jean and all that kind of stuff, in that scene, can you give us an idea of the size of it? I mean, what kind of numbers of bands? Are we talking 4 bands, 5 bands, or are we talking larger numbers? And are they getting respect from the secular bands?
There are larger numbers of bands, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen bands that are actually getting some serious press in mainstream magazines like Revolver and Alternative Press or AP Magazine. There's quite a bit. Face Down Records has a roster. Flee the Scene, Bloodline Calligraphy, No Innocent Victim. Those bands are getting notoriety. And then the Solid State roster, which is a sub-label of Tooth and Nail Records. You've got Norma Jean and Under Oath, Dead Poetic, and Haste the Day, Demon Hunter. There's just a lot of bands that are consistently getting good press and airplay and getting their videos played on MTV2 and Headbangers Ball. So I don't know the exact number, but I would say that's at least a dozen, maybe 2 dozen bands that are really good. So it's not just a few anymore, it's a lot, which is kind of indicative of the music scene in general. The floodgates have been open, and now there's not just 4 really cool bands everybody has to like. Queen, Zeppelin, Who, the Stones. Now there's like 400, and everybody likes to know the band that nobody else has heard of.
What kind of stuff has come up in the Christian scene?
Music styles, or...
Yeah.
There's been a couple of bands that have actually been innovative, which is something you love to see. Like back in the early 90s, there was a couple bands from Houston, King's X and the Galactic Cowboys, who created a new sound. They took 60s, 70s, and 80s rock and melded it together to create something brand new. And the band Zao has kind of done that on the extreme metal side of things. They've taken really, really heavy and brutal and abrasive metal like death metal and black metal, and they've mixed it with the energy and ferociousness of hardcore. And Zao has been kind of pretty innovative. A lot of bands out there, mainstream and, of course, Christian, actually will point to Zao and say, this band, got us inspired, or this band did something different. And so they've earned a lot of respect and credibility for being innovative. They've done that. Christian bands really jumped into the whole emo, screamo, post-hardcore, indie rock thing with a lot of vigor, and a lot of bands have done a real good job at that. Branson is a band that started out like a lot of hardcore bands. Hardcore musicians felt like, where else is there to go with this direction? It's just all intensity, 900 miles an hour all the time. And so the classic cliche of what hardcore musicians did is they either went indie rock, real super, super mellow, super lo-fi, slow, or they went emo, which is kind of a mixture of up and down dynamics, and that mixes the passion of hardcore but the melodies of pop music. And a lot of Christian bands definitely went one of those two routes, and it kind of helped form the when you list if you go to the second generation of emo bands, if you stop talking about the early ones like Mineral, the second generation is flooded with Christian bands like Appleseed Cast and Branson, Dear Ephesus. A lot of bands have kind of made a difference in their scene, so that's been kind of innovative coming from Christians, which I like to see.
You, in your magazine, you raise the awareness of the Christian rock scene quite a lot. Why do you think that's important?
Well, I grew up reading magazines like Cream and Circus and Hit Parader, and I understood from an early age, based upon my own experience, how influential music magazines can be. Because you look up to these artists, and whenever you can get a glimpse of the artist's life, that usually endears you to their art more. Like Project 86 released Making of album, or DVD for their last album, and the rest will follow. And watching that DVD behind the scenes, seeing them wrestle with their songwriting, endeared me more to the band. It made me love that album more. It made me want to get that album out immediately and listen to it again. And so giving insight to an artist and what makes them tick and how they make their art can kind of help develop that love or that fanaticism or that excitement, because it gives you more of an insight as to who the artist is as a person. So it helps in that sense. It also helps the artist just have a platform and raise awareness for both the band and the fan. So I think it's important in that sense. And I think with HM Magazine, one thing we're doing now is, trying to capitalize on our strength, which is our distinction, that our music is with a faith perspective, that there's a Christian inspiration and a biblical worldview behind the art we talk about or champion. Excuse me. And so that's what we try to do, and it's a lot of fun.
What's the future looking like for Christian rock? Well,
there's an ever-widening chasm between ministry music and good art, and there's a case to be made for both sides. There's nothing like having a pastoral influence in a young person's life, or even a young person at heart, to have art or entertainment that they enjoy, but have an inspirational message behind it. So like going to church every Sunday and hearing a really good pastor preach a good sermon, the Word of God can change your life and inspire you and help give you strength and courage. And if you have that put to music, it is going to, help shape your life and help keep you healthy. So there's a lot to be said for quote-unquote ministry music or ministry Christian rock that's very upfront about where it's coming from. On the second hand, there's a good case to be made for Christians excelling in their craft, whether it's science or medicine or art. If the best person in their field happens to be a Christian, I think that speaks volumes for the authenticity of the gospel and the reality of God. And so it's great that Christians would be making great art that would be noticed by their peers, not just getting pats on the back from their Christian friends, but actually inspiring and impressing everybody in the general public. So it's great to see that and people doing something as unto the Lord at the best of their abilities. So I'm really happy with both, but there is an ever-widening gap between the two camps. Back in the day, it used to be Christian kids that liked music. They would look to bands like Resurrection Band, Mile in the Favor and Broken Heart, Petra, and Daryl Mansfield Band. They would see a model for ministry where they would use a concert that would culminate in an altar call or would culminate in a very bold declaration of the gospel. And this is what Jesus can do in your life, and this is why we rock tonight. And that was the model that most young kids saw growing up, and they would say, I want to be like that. And then in the early 90s, a new model formed. Bands like King's X said, we are going to make great art. We happen to be Christians, and it's going to be reflected in our art, but we're not going to try to be a ministry of the church. We're just going to try to be Christians in the world, but not of it. And then bands like MXPX and POD expounded on that and created another successful model. And now for the past decade and a half, Christian musicians have looked up to them and said, I want to be like that. And so that's the more popular model now. So you're seeing a lot more direction going there. So I see both being represented in the future, but I see the gap probably widening a little bit more. But I also see the health of the ministry-minded music getting stronger and people not neglecting that. I think there'll be kind of a return to some of that in a sense, but the gap will widen between the two camps.
Doug, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Is there one more thing I could add, an observation?
Sure.
Okay. It's funny. I've been to England a couple times in the past 10 years or so, and one thing I noticed is a lot of people in the UK have looked with a little bit of jealousy towards the Christian music scene in the U.S., and they would tell me, man, I wish we had that. I wish we had a thriving Christian scene where we had Christian radio and Christian concerts and Christian music shops we could go in. And the musicians in the United States are going, you know what? I went over and I played Greenbelt last year, and they don't even have Christian radio. The Christian artists over there are being played on mainstream stations, right? Donna and the MX and Green Day. And so it's funny, the American musicians are jealous of the scene in the UK, and the scene in the UK are jealous of the scene in America, because we want our music to be taken seriously, and we don't want to have dividing walls between Christian and non-Christian music. We want to go out there and take our idea to the marketplace of ideas, as it were. And the people in the UK from the outside have looked into the United States and seen this thriving, growing Christian music scene, which the people in America have kind of grown tired of and have seen the shallowness of it. So it's kind of funny to see both sides looking at each other saying, I wish I had that.
Big Doug Van Pelt. You're listening to Beer Christianity. And this has been a review podcast. I have no idea if this works or not, so let us know. You can tweet at BeerXianity to let us know, or you can write to us at beerchristianity@yahoo.com. Visit our Facebook page and do some commenting. Hey, could you subscribe and could you review us on Apple Podcasts and I'm assuming Stitcher you can review. give us some reviews, give us some follows, and if you enjoy it, tell people about it, share it, suggest some content, all that kind of stuff. We're enjoying doing it, so I hope you're enjoying listening. And we'd like to carry on doing it. So check it out, and I don't know what else I wanted to ask you, really. Listen, follow, let us know that you like it, and share it with your friends. I'm going to say goodbye now. Thank you very much for listening to Beer Christianity. Coming up in future episodes, we have Peter Laws on Halloween and on whether God would allow people to go to hell and whether he wants them to, and just general attitudes to that sort of stuff, which is going to be in no way controversial. We've also got Graham Greene and priests and complicated attitudes to religion, and what we can learn from literature that we can't learn from theology textbooks. I think it's going to be really amazing. You should read some Graham Greene while you're listening to your Norma Jean, because it rhymes, baby. Thanks a lot for listening to Beer Christianity, and I'll be back with my partners in grime really soon. See ya.